a video on this champagne yeast that I bought. So I bought some champagne yeast to faff around with making um, cider and fermenting other things because I wanted to compare it to the wild yeast that I'd collected. I've got some left. I bought some before and it died. I don't know how long it lasts once you've opened it. So I don't have to buy any more. So I kind of thought, well, what we'll do is we'll freeze it to see if it actually freezes. But first, let's just check that it's still alive. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to ferment some grapes with it. So I've washed them, so to get rid of any, hopefully to get rid of any like natural yeast that's already on them. So then this will kind of be like a two-prong kind of video. So we'll see if the champagne yeast freezes when we can put it in the freezer, and it will prolong its life. I mean, it's dried yeast, so it should last a few months anyway once you've kind of opened it. And it's one of those packets that's got like a proper sealing thing on it. I won't open it just yet, but I'll show you when I'm there. So, but I thought let's ferment these grapes that we've got. Then we can see if the these are the grapes that I used to make some more wild yeast. So they've just been in the fridge. So let's ferment these, but then let's also see if we ferment these, then that'll oh, we don't want that one. We don't want them too soft. Don't want those. Because they'll have already started to ferment in a certain way. So let's see, by adding the champagne yeast to these, we'll see if the champagne yeast is still active, like it's still going to kind of work. I can go on a compost pile. And we'll also see if we can keep the. I just need something to tamp that down with. What have we got? Something. Wooden spoon. So, and then we'll also be able to see if it survives in the freezer, and we'll see if it ferments some fruit. Because normally I just ferment juices. And also, we'll see if it actually fermenting this fruit keeps it alive. So we start with instead of a dried yeast, we start with we'll start a champagne yeast culture using these grapes. Does that make sense? Yeah, so like my wild yeast, which is in this jar here, it's a culture and it keeps alive. And as long as you keep feeding it a few grapes, or taking some of it and feeding it some fresh grapes, it keeps it alive. And it's in the fridge, and then you can use it to ferment anything you kind of want. So, but instead of using this dried stuff, let's see if we can turn this dried yeast into that type of culture. So it's got one of those seals on it, so it's like an air. Why am I having trouble with my words? I haven't had a drink. An airtight seal. So we'll add these bits of yeast into here. That's probably too much. And then make sure no bits of yeast are caught in the trap there. I might just put that in a vacuum bag, just to kind of make it a better seal. So let's add that yeast into there, and then that should start fermenting quite quickly. And then I've got a bit of cloth for the top, and then we will have a champagne yeast culture, a live one. That'd be kind of quite interesting, wouldn't it? And it's just a way of kind of extending the life of of your champagne yeast. So that's cloth on that. It is clean, and then we just need a plastic band around the top of it. So bacteria, well, yeast and bacteria need oxygen to live. So put that on there. Air can get to it and keep it alive. And there's fruit in there which will feed it, and then we'll see if it starts to ferment over. It'll probably start fermenting tomorrow. Actually, this champagne yeast is kind of quite quick starting, and then I'll know that if it starts fermenting, that is alive, and then we can freeze it, and then for the next time we need it, so it won't be wasted. It was only cheap. It was only like $5.99. I've only used really half of it, but why it's, you kind of go, well, it's only three quid's worth of champagne yeast, but I want that £3. You know what I mean? I don't want to waste it. You know, I've got better things I can spend that £3 on. You know, even though it's a small amount, but I'm going out, I might fancy a coffee. That £3 will buy me a coffee, and if I have to buy any more, it's £5.99. So it's free postage and packaging, but it has to arrive, and there's all that kind of stuff that kind of goes with things being delivered, and your carbon footprint and all that kind of stuff. So if we can preserve it by putting it in the freezer and extending its life, or turn it into a culture, that's kind of quite interesting, isn't it? Well, interesting and money saving, which ticks 2 boxes for me. So we have fermentation. Can you see? We have lots of bubbles forming like that. So that works. The yeast in the champagne yeast is still alive, so we're going to have a go at freezing it to prolong it, and we're going to have a go at keeping this alive. I'm working tomorrow, so there'll be some leftover grapes, which I won't waste. We'll put more grapes in there, and we'll carry on. Give it lots of grapes to kind of feed on, and then we'll stick it in the fridge with a lid on. I haven't got a lid, but we'll just put a lid on just loosely so it can breathe, and then we'll kind of see how long we can keep that champagne yeast alive. A little bit. It'll probably stay alive. It'll probably want to burn itself out a little bit quicker than my uncollected yeast. So I'll need to keep a closer eye on it. Otherwise, it'll run out of food, and then because it runs out of food, it will die. So that's that. So I'm not just going to freeze that as it is. I'm going to put it in a vacuum bag, just to kind of protect it from the freezer burn or anything like that. So I've just made a bag a little bit smaller, and we'll just slide that down to the bottom of the bag. Hopefully. Could have folded it in half, not to worry. Go down to the bottom of there, and then you don't have to put the bags in that way in a vacuum machine, a vacuum sealing machine. We can put them in that way. So as long as that fits in there, and that puts down on there, and that goes there. There we go. So that's sucked all the air out. So the frost in the freezer shouldn't cause any damage to the yeast. Hopefully, fingers crossed. And then what we can do is to make the bag a little bit smaller. The industrial ones work differently, but these kind of like domestic cheapy ones, you kind of have to play around with the bags a little bit more. So that's kind of quite a big bag. I don't want all that, but what we can do is clamp the bag down there and just seal the bag using the seal button rather than the so-called air out of button. And then what it does is it seals that, and then we've got a smaller bag. Unfortunately, you can't just make the bag that size and suck all the air out of it, because you need to fit the that bit of the plastic under there. I have tried to kind of faff around. It don't kind of work, but I've wasted that, haven't I? Because now I've done that. Yeah, I'm sure there must be a way. I'm sure there must be a way of making the bag small and things like that. But I haven't played around with it. I'll play around with it sometime and see if we can make the bag smaller and not waste that plastic. But that'll go to the plastic recycling, so that's okay. And that was a bag that I'd used for something else, and I'd simply washed out. So it's like probably the third time I've used that bit of plastic. So I don't like plastic waste. But anyway, so that's going to go in the freezer. This is going to turn into a champagne yeast culture, and there'll be a bit more of video in a few weeks' time. See if the champagne yeast is still alive, maybe. So this is the champagne yeast in the fridge, in the grapes, the culture that I'm making, and you can see it's fermenting even in the cold of the fridge. So it's a really strong yeast. Certainly a lot stronger than the wild yeast, collected yeast that I collected. It's having trouble focusing this camera. We might see some bubbles. I could shake it and some bubbles come up, but you know, there you go, there you go. So you can see that it's fermenting. But it's fermenting as we are filming it. Well, we, as in me. So that's interesting. And then I was watching something on making whiskey. I was curious. I had a question about the whiskey process. What makes a whiskey type of thing, and you know, I wanted to know kind of what percentage they distilled the alcohol to, and you know, so I was watching a video, and they were saying that they use a certain type of yeast that's very fast acting, so it will ferment in anything between 40 hours and 100 hours, depending on like a full fermentation within 40 hours, or between 40 and 100 hours, depending on how you treated it. And I was like, wow, that's kind of fast. That's like 2 days. You could have like a whole batch fermented a certain type of yeast. But anyway, so that's kind of quite interesting. That I'm gonna have to keep an eye on that. And if I want to create a culture, it's going to need regular feeding. Otherwise, it's just going to turn to alcohol. So I can't just keep a champagne yeast alive like that in the fridge, I don't think, without keeping feeding it. And inevitably, it will get to the stage where although it will happen slower, it will turn all those grapes into alcohol and it will kill itself. But anyway, so that's kind of quite interesting from my point of view. So we are at 2 months later, and I've fed the champagne yeast culture a few times with some fresh grapes, so it's still fermenting, and it's been in the fridge for 2 months. You can see the bubbles there, so that's still alive after 2 months. So what I've decided to do is, because I worry that that's going to turn too much into alcohol and it will kill the yeast. So what I've done is I've taken some fresh grapes and squished them up and put them in another jar, and taken some of the juice, which will contain the champagne yeast, and I've put that juice into that jar, and that's started to ferment. So it's going to bubble. It'll bubble to the top, but it's definitely alive. I did it yesterday, I think, or was it maybe the day before? But it's fermenting. It's fermenting, so that means it's alive. So that means that will keep in, as long as I keep topping it up with a few fresh grapes, that will keep alive for easily another 2 months. I'm going to discard that because it's done its job. It's done its job, so that's going to go in the compost, and this will be the champagne yeast that I keep going, meaning that we can keep a champagne, the dried yeast that we bought, we can keep it alive, so we don't have to just leave it in the back of the cupboard and then try and use it in a year's time and it'd be dead. We can actually keep the culture alive and slowly fermenting in the fridge. So that's kind of interesting, and it stops you having to buy any more champagne yeast. So that's that. Now also there was me freezing some of the champagne yeast and putting it in the freezer. I'm not ready to ferment anything yet, so that's going to be part of another video, and part of the video which I've frozen some of my wild yeast culture, and we'll see if that survives the freezing process. So that will be part of that video, won't be part of this video. This video is just about that. But there we go, it works, a success.